Okay, boys and girls, today we're going to do lesson 8.2, which is percents, fractions, and decimals. And our purpose today is to understand and write a percent as a ratio, as a fraction, and as a decimal. And so we've already done them as fractions, so we've done them as a ratio, and today we're going to incorporate the decimal. But before I begin, I want to know, how are fractions, decimals, and percents, how are they related? And so I forgot to put that in there. How are they related? And they're related because they are all a piece of a whole amount. For example, a decimal is, for example, 0.12 is a piece of 1. So it's smaller than 1 whole. 12% is a piece of a whole, of 1 whole, or 100%. And 100% would be 1 whole amount. For example, 100% of a candy bar, if I gave you 100% of the candy bar, you get the whole thing. If I give you 12%, you get a small little piece. You get 12%. Okay, you get 12%. And a fraction would be 12 over 100, which is also a piece of a whole, And so fractions, decimals, and percents are always going to be less than 1. So now we're going to go and we're going to learn how to convert a percent into a fraction and a percent into a decimal. And it's very simple. So if we have 35% and we want to convert this into a fraction, we kind of already talked about this. Remember, the fraction, this is out of 100. And so basically it's going to be 35 out of 100 in fraction form. And then we have ratio form, 35 over 100. And we have 35 out of 100. Okay, those are the ratio forms. So this is our fraction. And then last week we found the greatest common factor. And I'm just going to write it over here. We found the GCF. And we would do something like this. And we put 35 and we put 100. And it's 1 times 35 and 5 times 7. And then 1 times 100, 2 times 50, 3 times nothing, 4 times 25, 5 times 20, and 10 times 10. And then we took the greatest common factor, which would, for this problem, would be 5. And we divide this by 5 and this by 5. And we end up with 7 over 20. And so we have a fraction. Now, how do we convert it to a decimal? This is a very simple strategy to use. If I have 35%, in order for me to convert it to a decimal, I'm going to put a decimal place here, always next to the percent sign, next to the percent sign, once again, next to the percent sign. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. 2 places to the right. So I'm going to move it once, and I'm going to move it twice. My new decimal is here, and so I have 0.35, and then I get rid of the percent sign. I get rid of it, and so here's my answer, 0.35. If you noticed, all I did was move it to the right, or sorry, moved it to the left 2 place values. So we're going to practice a couple more. Now, how do I make this? So I want this to be a fraction and I want this to be a decimal. So if I want it to be a fraction, 15%, it would become 15 over 100. And then I have to find the greatest common factor. And so I want the greatest common factor for this problem because, and I'm trying to find because I want to find the greatest common factor and I already know what it is, of 15 and 100, and it's going to be 5. If I was to do my table, and then 15 divided by 5 is 3, and 100 divided by 5 is 20, so this is the simplest form. And how do I convert 15% into a decimal? So I made it a fraction already. I want to make it a decimal. And so what I do is I put my decimal point right here, right where I put my decimal point, and I move it one place, I move it 2 places, and now it's here. So I end up with 0.15, and then I get rid of the percent sign. And so what I want you to do is go ahead and do number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 and 6. And when you're done with those, come up. I'll have a list up here so you can check to see if you're correct. But basically, it's really simple to do. It's 40%. The fraction is always going to be 40 over 100. And we need to simplify it. We need to find the greatest common factor. This is probably going to be the hardest part for you guys, is finding the greatest common factor. And you're going to put 40 and you're going to put 100 and you're going to find the greatest common factor of this. And then 40% in a decimal, all you do is put your decimal point here and you move it 1 and 2, and so it becomes 0.40. So now let's look at Model 2. It says modeling decimals, fractions, and percent equivalencies. So model 0.78, so it says model 0.78 by shading in a 10 by 10 grid. A 10 by 10 grid would equal 100. So I'm going to model 0.78, so I'm going to shade in 0.78, and so I'm going to get my highlighter out. I'm going to shade in, there's 10, there's 20, there's 30, there's 40, there's 50, 60, 70, and then 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so what I end up having is 78 over 100. And what this means is 78 out of 100, or 78%. Okay? How am I going to model 1.42 by shading in a 10 by 10 grid? Now, if it's 1.42, this first number is going to be 1. So that means I'm going to shade in one whole square. I'm going to shade in one whole square because the first number is all shaded in. So here is my 1. This is my 1, which is right here. And then I'm going to shade in 0.42. And so I'm going to take a different color. I'm going to shade in 0.42. I'm going to shade in 42 here, 10, 20, 30, 40, 41, and 42. And so I have 42. So this is one whole and 42 hundredths. So what this means is one whole would be 100 out of 100 plus 42. So this would be 100 shaded, 100 out of 100, 100 shaded. And then this would be 42 shaded. So this equals 142 over 100 is what it would equal. So we would end up having 142 out of 100, or 142%. Now, here's another one. And I messed up on this one. I didn't change the decimal. It should be 125%. And so instead of here, it's going to be 125%. Model 125% by shading in a 10 by 10 grid. So we have 100%. So 125% means 100%, 1 out of 100, 100 over 100, which equals one whole. This will equal one whole. And so now I'm going to take my one whole and I'm going to shade it in over here. And so I'm going to shade all this in here. There's my one whole shaded in. So I have 100 shaded, and then now I just need 25 shaded, and so I'm going to put 25 over here. And so I'm going to shade in 25, 10, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25. And so I have 100 shaded here, and I have 25 shaded here. So this would equal 125 total shaded out of 100. So 125%, the decimal would be 1.25. And so the same thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to take the percentage, 125%, and I'm going to put my decimal point right here, just like I did with the other ones, and I'm going to move it 2 times, 1 and 2, and it ends up right between the 1 and the 2, and so this would be 1.25, and then I get rid of the percent. I get rid of the percent sign. Model 3. So here we're going to go to Model 3. And anytime pause this video and then you can continue it later. At Montgomery, 96 out of 200 students tested on last year's CASP. What is the decimal? What is the fraction? And what is the percent of this information? So we have 96 over 200. Now we know a percent is out of 100. Is out of 100. But this time I have 200. So there's a couple of things that I could do here. I'm going to first create an equivalent fraction, and I'm going to go like this. And then this will give me my percent. And so how do I go from 200 to 100? I'm going to divide. I'm going to divide by what? So 200 divided by 100, and I'm going to divide, and I'm going to get 2. So this is 2. 200 divided by 100 is 2. So then I'm going to divide up here by 2. Whatever I do on top, I do on the bottom. So 96 divided by 2 equals 4, 8, 16, which is 48. This would end up being 48 out of 100, which is 48%. Remember, the fraction would end up being the percent because it's out of 100. Question 2. 1/8 of students who passed are from 6th grade. So we know 1/8 are from 6th grade. What is the fraction, the decimal, and the percent of 1/8? And so I'm going to convert it to a percent. So this will give me the percent. Actually, it'll give me the fraction, and it'll also give me the percent. And so what I'll do is 8 to get to 100. So what number would I multiply 8 to get to 100? So let's see, 100 divided by 8, and I would have 1 here, 8, 20. This goes in 2 times. This is 16, and minus 4, bring down a 0. We got a 0, bring up a decimal point, and I would continue this, bring down a decimal point, and this is 5 and 40. So it would be 12.5. 12.5 would go up here. Now, what does this mean? This means this is my fraction. My percent would be 12.5%. And my decimal would be just taking this number, taking my 12.5%, putting my decimal, moving it 1, 2, and which would equal 0.125. Okay, I want to check for understanding. I want you to do question 1, question 2, and then I want you to complete all of these problems here, and then get into the independent practice. And if you have any questions, go ahead and ask Mr. Morales. I'll be here to support you on these questions. Go ahead and begin.